Thank you. With me here now is the director, Mr. Rolf de Heer, of Charlie's Country. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and nice to be here.
To start off with, could you explain the main difference between the Aboriginal people and us, the white bastards?
I think the first thing we have to say is we tend to make big generalisations about them and they don't about us. And so the first generalisation that you make and that I make in return is the Aboriginal people. It's not a group of people, it's not coherent, it's not a nation. What remains are still 100 different languages from originally 250. People with different customs. People talk about Aboriginal art, the dot painting. Well, that dot painting is specific to that mob in that desert there. It doesn't begin to exist in Ramingining where the film is made. So that's, I think, the first thing that we have to disavow, that there is an Aboriginal people. Many of the remaining groups that are still sort of tribes, they may have something in common culturally, but they have more differences. I have things in common with you and with other nations culturally, but the differences between Australia and Uruguay are substantial. So it's a bit like that. And for the rest of it, there are Aboriginal lawyers, there are Aboriginal accountants, intellectuals, and they may have some of their Aboriginal culture left, but they're much more like you and I than you and I are like David Gulpilil, who's, for example, in Charlie's Country.
David Gulpilil, the main actor in your film, he's a man that struggles with these two societies.
You mean the actor or
yes.
the character?
Well, both, I suppose.
Well, they're very different people.
Yeah.
Actually, quite different. David is much more articulate than Charlie. He's much more passionate and angry in a way than Charlie. David has travelled the world, so he's much more worldly than Charlie. Well, Charlie is much more passive than David is. Both have their problems with I guess with the clashing of the cultures, and that's really what it is. David himself, as an actor, he's splendid, but in terms of somebody finding their way in white society, even as an actor, he has some problems, some issues, and my sense of it is largely from when he started. When David was 16, he was plucked virtually out of the bush to act in a film, because he was recognised as being this great dancer, this great mover. And that was a film called Walkabout. Now, on the film set of Walkabout, there was an actor who was a renowned drinker, and he would drink around 24 beers during the working day. Now, he taught David not only how to get drunk, but he taught David how to act sober whilst in a state of being drunk.
This is a masterclass.
And this is David's first great role model in the white world, in acting. A couple of films later, David did a film with Dennis Hopper. Now, Dennis Hopper was one of the great substance abusers, and David still talks with pride about how they were locked up in jail together during the shoot. That we're watching the film, and he said, oh, he was off his face. We were both off our face during that scene. And he's very proud of that. And that was David's second great role model. Now, the wonder of it is that David has done as well as he has, because really, by all accounts, he should have, he didn't have the armoury to understand what that is in terms of being a role model.
He was, when you mentioned the first film, his debut was in 1971. He was an instant star. He traveled the world, met John Lennon, Bob Marley, so on, so on. When you met him for this film, of course you befriended a long time ago, but he was in jail.
Yes.
Actually, this was the starting point of this film.
Yes. Yes.
Could you explain about?
Yes, David had left his community some years ago because of a sort of a tribal dispute that I never fully understood, and I'd ask, and was afraid of going back, and began to live in Darwin, and ultimately his alcoholism got the better of him, and he began to drink very heavily. Ultimately that goes with violence, and he ended up in jail, which I think would have saved his life. He was 39 kilos when he was incarcerated, because he'd completely stopped eating, and it seemed like he was simply trying to end it all in a subconscious way. And I went up to see him because I have a friendship with him. We've made the tracker together, and I love so much about that film. And it is what it is, at least in part, because of David's contribution to it. And 10 Canoes for me is it's a significant film. And it was a wonderful thing to do, and it wouldn't exist without David, And so I thought I'd go and see him. Not that there's anything that I can do for David when he's in jail. And I spent an hour with him in the jail that morning, and it was difficult because he looked terrible. All the life had gone out of him. He didn't have anything to say. He didn't want to talk. And at the end of the hour, I said to him, "Look, David, what are you going to do? When you get out, because you think, well, he's just going to go back to the same way of living." And he didn't know. And so I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he asked of me the only thing that I can do for him, which was he wanted to make another film with me, because he said that The Tracker was the best film that he had ever done. And so I thought, well, yes.
Yeah. We could explain a little bit about The Tracker is early 20th century film, where David Gulpillen is a prisoner of a white man.
He's not so much a prisoner. He's a black tracker.
Yeah, he's got a caging around his neck.
Only once he starts to misbehave. But that's simply how they were treated in
those days.
Yeah.
And 10 Canoes, the film after that, is about pre-colonial Aboriginal life.
Yeah.
Which was initiated by David, but he left the set.
Left the community
again
a
because
year or
of
so
a tribal
before we shot the film.
conflict.
Yes. Yeah.
I think you mentioned that he was scared he would have been speared.
Yes.
With a spear.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you make of that? Is that something? Is the situation now a bit better with him and his people?
He has reconciled with the community, and we had to do that. It was part of the process of making Charlie's Country. I had to take him back to Ramingining and see if it would work.
Which is where you shot the film. Yeah.
Yes, Ramingining is where we shot the film, which is where David was living for most of his life. And unless that worked, then we couldn't shoot the film there, and the film would have needed to change a lot from what it was. Because it relied on that place and those people. And so I took him back, and there had already been some bits and pieces of reconciliation. They shared the stage together on 10 Canoes when it was opening Sydney Film Festival, and that was a big step then, but then it wasn't followed up at all. So yes, he was reconciled with his community.
Is it true that part of the conflict, perhaps the main part, is that his people expect him to be very, very rich? Which is not.
Look, I don't know what that conflict was, but I did experience with David very strongly how, I mean, David talks about that he can move easily in white culture and in black culture, and he's very proud of that. He's completely wrong because he works badly in both, okay? Both are almost impossible for him. The whole Aboriginal culture there, and I talk about Ramingining, okay? Now,
which is
maybe lessons
yeah.
in for other cultures, but not necessarily. It's still completely based on traditional obligation. So if you own something, you own it too. If you've got money and somebody asks you for that money, you have to give them money. You just do. And I've been with David when he's had $300 in his pocket, and we go down to the one shop that exists to buy one packet of cigarettes, you know, which would at that stage would have cost $8. And we go down, he buys the packet of cigarettes, we go back. By the time he got back, he had a little bit of loose change left in his pocket and 3 cigarettes, and everything else had gone in 15 minutes. Now, when I first went there, I had a delegation of Aboriginal men come to me, about 5 of them, and one of them could speak English quite well. And I was to explain something to them about David, okay? Because from what they could work out, you know, they'd said to me, look, David he's an actor. I said, yes, he's an actor. He goes and he does acting in movies. Yes. So he's a movie star. Well, yes, he is. And overseas, they know about him. Well, to some degree. So he's a world-famous movie star.
A bit like Mel Gibson.
And then that's what they said. Okay. Mel Gibson, he's Australian. Okay. Yes. He's a movie star. Yes, he is. Okay. Then they knew they had me, because they said, Mel Gibson earns $20 million a film. Well, yes, right. Then only 2 things were possible after that, and both of them were very bad for David. Okay? Either David also earns $20 million a film, and he lies to them, and he hides the money. Okay, that's one possibility. The other possibility is that he earns what he says he earns. And if that's the case, then he's a complete idiot, because he's allowing white people to exploit him in a way that Mel Gibson, of course, isn't exploited. Okay? And both are very bad. And so he is in an impossible situation in that community, because there is not yet sufficient understanding of economics, of the way the world works. Yeah.
David Goulpilil is also a tremendous actor. But would you say the despair we see in his eyes, the anger, the sadness, is it also sometimes real, or you would?
Now you're talking about acting. Is it real? Okay. David is possibly the best actor I've worked with. He's certainly unique as an actor. I've not worked with anybody like him. He can do more with just a neutral shot on his face than anybody I've come across. In the community where David comes from, and David's learnt more, but he's still connected very strongly. When we did 10 Canoes, one of the problems that eventually I worked out what was going on is there is no notion of fiction. Okay? There is no concept of that for them. And so everything is real. And for one moment, they enter the real space. And in 10 Canoes, it worked because they were not playing their own ancestors, but they were their own ancestors. And what I learnt on 10 Canoes, I couldn't rehearse, because that would somehow prick the bubble of reality, and it would fall apart. Okay? So we had to work out ways to shoot everything the first time, and and make that work. Now, what David has been able to do, I think, is take that and harness that capacity to step into a real space. Okay, there's...
One could say it's the perfection of method acting.
David is, for me, the most complete combination of an instinctive actor and an intellectual actor, okay, where he can combine those two things perfectly. So, in a shot, for example, like where he has his head shaved, okay? Now, it's one of the great good luck stories in film. You have bad luck, and you all the stuff that's bad luck you haven't seen. It either doesn't exist and just existed in my mind, or it's on the cutting room floor because it didn't work, okay? But in the film, there's also good luck things, and the shaving of the head scene is one of those. It was not originally ever written. It was just he was in jail and then he had short hair, okay? And then I thought, well, we have to cut it anyway, so we may as well shoot it, okay? And I remember writing little 4 words in pencil, you know, Charlie has haircut. And it's just in pencil on the script, bang, and it went. And I found a barber who could cut hair very quickly, okay? So I thought, okay, that's the way to do it. There was almost no discussion with David, and often there isn't. I need to say just a few words, because he understands. But there was only one take, of course, and I thought probably we would use a little part of it, if at all, okay? So, we shot the scene. Now, it's lucky in 2 ways. One is, if we hadn't shot it, we would have had a serious problem in the film, because nobody would have recognised Charlie with his head shaved. In fact, people on the film crew who were not there when the haircut was happening simply walked past him after having worked with him for weeks. Or I even got to the point where I would introduce people to him. Hello, Julie, this is David. And I would say, David. And David would shake hands. How do you do, Julie? And Julie would go, yes, hi, hi, thinking he was an extra. And Julie would walk off, and then 5 minutes later you would hear a scream when she realised it was David. And so if we hadn't had that shot in the film, each one of you who saw it would have been confused for 5 or 10 minutes, wondering what has happened to Charlie. Eventually you would work it out, but it would have thrown you completely out of the film. So that's luck number 1. Number 2 is, it's become this great scene because of David, okay? Because he understands what's happening to him, okay, in a way that we didn't need even to talk about, and he could lay all his own experiences on it, and the humiliation of his people, and it's all there, and he puts it all there because he knows, he understands, and he brings his own experiences and his own realities to it. And even if it's not his reality, it's somebody else's reality, you know, that he knows and understands of his people. So, yeah.
Do you think that you yourself, being a bit of an outsider, you were born over here in the Netherlands, you
that
left...
doesn't make me an outsider, it makes me an insider.
Over here it does, but you left at the age of 7 or 8.
Yes.
You went to Australia, of course, but I mean, being there as a bit of an outsider, do you think that has sharpened your view also for the indigenous people over there?
Look, I don't know. I never thought about it much as a you know. Look, when I was at primary school, I was a bit of an outsider, as was my brother and my sister and so on. By the time I was in high school, not at all. And I never felt like an outsider in that way. And I largely forgot about my Dutchness until 1993, when Bad Boy Bubby came out in Venice, and everybody suddenly, I was a Dutch director. I went, whoa, where did that come from?
That's how we do it.
But that's how it happens, yes. That said, I know that the first 7 years of my upbringing were utterly Dutch, and
Heemstede,
that even
right? Heemskerk.
Heemskerk, yeah. Velsenoord, that's where we live.
Velsenoord.
Beverwijk and all that. Yep. And even after we got to Australia, my parents were still Dutch, and they're still bringing me up. Okay, and so yes, I must have more of the Dutch sensibility in me than I think I do. Okay, now does that sharpen me up for that? I don't know. Okay, I can't tell. It doesn't feel like it to me. I see different things. I see different situations. I make different films. I happen to have made 3 that have had Indigenous content, and 2 that are primarily Indigenous, because even the tracker is not primarily Indigenous.
Right. No.
And I've had a really interesting education into the world of that mob of Aboriginal people over the years, and lucky. But as a filmmaker, I think it's more that I'm a filmmaker. You know, that I'm meant to be able to do that. It's not just Dutch-born Australians that I should be making films about, because they're the ones I know. In fact, I know them least well. But
you would have been in trouble then. By
yeah.
now.
So as a filmmaker, I need to understand Aboriginal people. I need to understand women of this sort. I need to understand children and get inside them, inside their heads. I made a film with somebody with cerebral palsy and try to just get really inside who they are. That's my job as a filmmaker, not as a Dutchman or as an Australian.
There is a bit of room for a couple of questions from the audience for the Dutch-Australian filmmaker over here. Please do raise your hand or step up to the microphone. Yeah.
Hi, Rolf. David, do you use him only as an actor in relation to the problems of the Aborigines, or does he also makes other pictures? Has he had another character?
David has acted in probably 40 films. Crocodile Dundee, Australia.
Yeah, but as a, let's say, a real Aboriginal. He is an Aboriginal person in there.
Yes.
I mean...
Would you cast him in a part that could be played by a white person as well?
Something like that.
Probably not.
No.
Because he is too specific. Okay? Yeah. His English is not good enough. He has to work very hard with his English. He's okay, but it's his 6th or 7th language. And to act in English is hard for him. But he's so specific and so still somehow tied to the bush that a normal part is difficult to imagine him in that. And it's what has stopped him from being a greater force as an actor. Yeah.
I think this is his first lead in 40 years.
The Tracker was his first lead ever, and this is his second one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that figures.
But this is the first really dominant role that he has had.
Yeah. Is there another question? Then I suppose we have to wrap it up. We could. There's one more quick. There we go.
Give my respect. It's a beautiful film. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh. And for those of you who are wondering, David has not had a drink for 3 years. He's a different human being. I don't think he will ever have another drink in his life. He's both physically and psychologically better than any time I've seen him since I've met him 15 years ago. He's made fundamental changes to his life, and the film has been a help in that. But he's made those changes.
He's dancing again, also. Or
his feet are not good enough for proper dancing.
Because the part about the character dancing on the opening of is actually David himself, right? For the Queen at the opening?
No. He's danced for the Queen, but in England.
In England.
Yes.
Well, still, he danced for the Queen. That's more than we could say.
Yes.
Mr. Rolf de Heer, thank you very much for
Okay.
both your film and your presence over here.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.